Meryl Streep stopped mid-sentence. She had been answering a question about her process. A real answer, not a polished one. The kind she gives when she has decided to be honest rather than composed. And then a sound came from somewhere off to the left of the stage. Not from the speakers, not from the band, from somewhere further back. And her voice simply stopped. Not tapered off. Not paused. Stopped, the way a candle stops when something extinguishes it, completely, between one moment and the next, with no warning and no remainder. Her head turned, not toward Jimmy Fallon, not toward the audience, toward the sound. Her hands, which had been moving the way her hands always move when she is thinking through something aloud, small precise movements, shaping the air around the idea, went still in the position they were in and stayed there. Suspended, her eyes moved to the left and slightly upward, the angle of someone listening to something that is not quite close enough to hear perfectly and is trying to close the distance through attention alone. Jimmy Fallon did not move. His hand was resting on the desk, and it stayed there. His mouth was open from the breath before his next question, a question that never arrived. He was watching Meryl Streep's face move through something he could not name, and whatever he saw there told him clearly, and without ambiguity, that the interview was over and something else had begun. 300 people in that studio held their breath. It was a Wednesday night taping, October 2023. The Tonight Show starring Jimmy Fallon. Meryl Streep was the guest. A new film. The kind of booking the production team does not have to work for. The kind of guest who fills the room before she sits down. She had walked out with the particular ease of someone who has been doing this long enough to be genuinely comfortable in it. Not performing ease, but inhabiting it. And the audience had responded the way audiences respond to Meryl Streep, with warmth and something close to reverence. The warmth of people in the presence of someone who has given them, over 50 years, more than they were ever asked to give. She had sat down. She had looked at Jimmy Fallon with the attentiveness of someone who is actually going to listen to the questions. She had been relaxed and generous and funny in a dry, precise way that reminded you how rarely you remember she is funny until she is being funny directly in front of you. The interview had been going beautifully. She had talked about the film with the specific enthusiasm of someone who still finds the work genuinely interesting after 50 years of doing it, which is rarer than it sounds. She had said something about a director she had worked with recently that made 300 people lean forward. She had laughed at a story Jimmy Fallon told, a real laugh, brief and complete, the kind that does not wait for cameras. Jimmy had asked her, "Where do you go when you're preparing for a role to find something true?" Not a technique, something true. She had started to answer. She had been saying something about listening, about how the most important thing she had ever learned about acting was that it was not about producing emotion, but about receiving it. About how you had to make yourself quiet enough and open enough that the character's feeling could come into you, rather than being manufactured from the outside. She had been somewhere in the middle of that thought, the words arriving in the right order, with the ease of a person who has thought about something long enough that the thinking and the saying have become the same act. And then, the sound came. It came from the back of the studio, from beyond the set, carried through the building by some acoustic accident of hallways and door seams, and the particular silence of a television studio at the moment between one thing and the next. A piano, an old upright piano by the sound of it, the kind whose tone has been shaped over decades into something warmer and less precise than it started as, playing slowly, a simple melody, unadorned, the kind of melody that has always existed and will exist after everyone who knows it is gone, the kind that sounds, when you hear it, like something you have always known rather than something you are hearing for the first time. Not loud, not performed, just played. Meryl Streep's hands went still. Her head turned toward the sound and stayed there. Her eyes were doing something, not filling, not wet, not the visible emotion of a performance, something quieter and older than that. The expression of someone for whom recognition is arriving from a very great distance, traveling across decades of accumulated time, and landing with the force that only things which have been traveling that long can carry when they finally arrive. She did not speak for a long moment. The entire studio froze. 300 people who had been leaning into a conversation about acting and truth now sat completely motionless, watching Meryl Streep listen to a piano being played somewhere in the building, and understanding without being told that whatever they were watching had nothing to do with the film, or the interview, or anything that had been written on any card. Jimmy Fallon's hand was still on the desk. He had not moved. His mouth had closed. He was watching Meryl Streep's face with the attention of someone who understands that he is witnessing something, and that witnessing it correctly requires nothing from him except to be still. The piano played for 40 seconds. Then it stopped. The studio stayed silent, and then Meryl Streep said, barely above a whisper, not to Jimmy Fallon, not to the audience, to the air itself, caught perfectly by her microphone, Eleanor. 300 people held their breath. To understand what happened next, you need to understand what happened in 1971. Meryl Streep wasn't always Meryl Streep. 3 Academy Awards, the greatest actor of her generation, a woman whose name had become shorthand for a particular and irreducible standard of what the work could be. In the fall of 1971, she was 22 years old and a junior at Vassar College in Poughkeepsie, New York. And she was not yet certain of anything. She had been performing since high school. She had a talent that other people mentioned often enough that she had started to believe it. But believing it and knowing what to do with it were different problems, and the second one was still unsolved. She was studying literature. She was singing in a band on weekends. She was doing theater in the evenings with the specific appetite of someone who has found the thing they need, but has not yet figured out the full shape of the need. There was a woman in Poughkeepsie named Eleanor Marsh. She was 68 years old in 1971. She had been a theater director in New York City in the 1940s and 1950s, working in the small and serious world of off-Broadway theater during the period when off-Broadway theater was inventing itself with a combination of ambition and complete financial precariousness that made it feel, to everyone involved, like it mattered enormously and might not survive the month. She had directed 15 productions over 12 years. She had worked with actors who would go on to become significant figures, and actors who would not. And she had learned through that work to tell the difference between the two kinds, and to understand that the difference was not in the talent. She had retired from directing in 1962, after a heart episode that was not severe enough to be fatal, but was pointed enough to carry a message. She had moved to Poughkeepsie, where her sister lived, and she had spent the following decade teaching acting privately out of the front room of her house on a street 3 blocks from the Vassar campus. She charged very little. She was known, among the students who found their way to her, as someone whose attention cost you something, not in money but in honesty. She did not encourage people who did not need encouragement. She did not say things she did not mean. She listened the way a surgeon looks at something, with total attention and without sentiment, and what she said afterward was always exactly what was true. Meryl Streep found her in September of 1971 through another student who said, "There is a woman you should go see." She did not say why, she just gave the address. Meryl knocked on the door on a Tuesday afternoon in October. Eleanor Marsh opened it and looked at her for a moment and said, "Come in and do something for me." She did not say hello. She did not ask her name. She simply stepped back from the door and sat down in a chair by the window and waited. Meryl Streep stood in the middle of the room and did a monologue she had prepared. It was from a play she had been working on for an audition, and she did it the way she had been doing it, with technical care, with the craft she had been building, with everything that she had been told was right about what she was doing. Eleanor Marsh listened without moving. When it was finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "You are doing everything correctly and feeling nothing. Do it again. This time, forget everything you know about how it's supposed to be done. Just listen to her. The woman you're playing. Stop producing her and start receiving her." Meryl Streep did it again. Eleanor Marsh said, "There. That's the thing. Did you feel that?" She had felt it. Eleanor Marsh said, "Most actors spend their entire careers trying to find that and never do. You just found it in your second attempt in my living room, which means it is natural to you. Which means your only job from now on is not to cover it up. The technique is there to serve it, not replace it. Never let the technique replace it." They worked together for 2 years. Every Tuesday afternoon, Eleanor Marsh at the window in her chair, Meryl Streep in the middle of the room, the particular silence of that house containing everything they were building together. Eleanor Marsh was not effusive. She was not warm in the way teachers are sometimes warm, offering encouragement as a form of cushioning against difficulty. She was warm the way precision is warm. The warmth of someone who respects you enough to tell you the truth at full volume. Before one of their last sessions, in the spring of 1973, Meryl Streep arrived to find Eleanor Marsh at the upright piano in the back room of the house. An old instrument, slightly out of tune, which Eleanor kept for reasons she had never explained. She was playing a simple melody, slowly. The same phrase repeated with small variations, the kind of playing that is not for an audience, but for the player, private and unhurried. She stopped when she heard the door and turned and said, "Sit down for a moment." Meryl sat. Eleanor played the melody once more, all the way through. Then she said, "Do you know what that is?" Meryl said she did not. Eleanor said, "I don't know what it is either. I made it up in 1943 and I have been playing it since then. I play it when I need to remind myself of something." She said, "I'm going to teach it to you. Not to play, just to hear. I want you to know what it sounds like, so that if you ever hear it again, you will know what it means." She played it again. She said, "It means you are still doing the work. It means the thing you found in your second attempt in this room is still alive and you have not covered it up with technique. Every time I hear it from now on, I will be playing it for you, wherever you are. And wherever you are, you will know." Meryl Streep said, "How will I hear it if I'm not here?" Eleanor Marsh smiled. She said, "You will hear it when you need to." Meryl left Poughkeepsie in the summer of 1973 to attend the Yale School of Drama. She wrote to Eleanor Marsh 3 times in the first year and received 3 letters in return. Short, precise. The letters of a woman who did not waste words and did not require anything from the correspondence, except that it be honest. After Yale, the career accelerated in the way that careers accelerate when the person inside them is ready. The letters became less frequent. The address in Poughkeepsie stopped responding in 1979. She did not know what had happened. She assumed Eleanor Marsh had died. She had not died. Eleanor Marsh had moved in 1978, at the age of 75, to a care facility in Woodbury, Connecticut, where her sister had a room. She had brought the upright piano. The facility had let her keep it in a small room off the main corridor, a room with good windows and a view of a courtyard garden. Because Eleanor Marsh had made clear that the piano was non-negotiable, and because the staff had found, within the first month, that when she played in the evenings, the residents in the adjacent rooms slept better. She was 102 years old. She had been playing the melody every evening for 50 years. Not always. Not as a ritual, but often. And always when she thought of a girl who had stood in her living room in October of 1971 and found something in her second attempt that most people never find in a lifetime. She had followed Meryl Streep's career from a chair by the window in a room at the care facility, the same posture she had always used when she was paying close attention. She had watched every film she could access. She had received the Academy Award wins with the specific satisfaction of a person whose prediction has been verified by the entire world. She had a great niece named Claire, who visited every Sunday. Claire had found the Tonight Show submission form online after Eleanor, in a rare talkative evening, had told her the story of a girl who had stood in her living room in Poughkeepsie in 1971, and what Eleanor had said to her after the second attempt, and the promise she had made about the piano. Claire had asked, "Do you want her to know you're still here?" Eleanor Marsh had considered this for a long moment. She said, "I want her to hear the piano." Claire had submitted the request to The Tonight Show with a recording. Eleanor Marsh playing the melody on the upright piano in the room with the good windows, recorded on Claire's phone on a Sunday afternoon in August 2023. She had explained who Eleanor was and what the melody meant, and asked if there was any way at all for it to be played for Meryl Streep on the air. The recording had arrived at the show 6 weeks before the October taping. Behind the scenes, the Tonight Show producer who received Claire's email had made a decision that defied every expectation. She had not passed it to a researcher. She had gone directly to Meryl Streep's representative with the recording and a single question. "Does this mean anything?" The response had come back within an hour. It said, "Please don't tell her. Please just play it." The production team had placed a small speaker in the back corridor adjoining the studio, positioned so that the sound would carry into the room the way Eleanor Marsh had described it. Not loud, not performed, simply audible, the way a sound is audible when you are in the right place to receive it. Meryl Streep had not been told what was coming. She had not been told a name. She had been asked only if she was willing to be surprised, and she had said yes, because she has always said yes to that. The piano had been played from the recording at the moment Jimmy Fallon's producer judged, watching from the wing, that Meryl Streep was most fully present. Mid-answer, mid-thought, the moment of greatest openness. Because Eleanor Marsh had been right in 1971 and was still right now. You have to be listening to hear it. You have to be quiet enough. Now the studio understood what it had been watching. Meryl Streep had not lost her train of thought. She had not been distracted. She had heard something she had been told she would hear when she needed to hear it, and she had needed to hear it, and it had arrived through a building's corridor on a Wednesday night in October 2023. 50 years after a woman in Poughkeepsie sat down at a piano and played it for the first time for someone other than herself. She turned back now toward Jimmy Fallon. Her eyes were bright, but not spilling. She was not undone. She was a woman who had just been reached across 50 years by something she had been told would reach her, and she was, if anything, completely composed. Not the composure of suppression, but the composure of someone who has just been confirmed in something they already knew. Jimmy Fallon had not moved. His hand was still on the desk. His mouth was still slightly open from the question he had never finished asking. He said, "Meryl, what was that?" She said, "That was Eleanor Marsh." He said, "Who is Eleanor Marsh?" She said, "She was my first real teacher. She was the person who showed me what I was doing before I knew what I was doing. She said, "She made me a promise in 1973 that I thought was a beautiful thing to say. I did not think she would keep it for 50 years. Jimmy Fallon said, "Is she?" Meryl Streep said, "I assumed she was gone. I've assumed it for a long time." Jimmy Fallon stood up. But this is the moment no one in the studio and no one watching at home ever saw coming. Claire Marsh was already standing in the third row, holding a tablet turned outward toward the stage. On the screen was a video call, and on the video call, in a chair by a window with a view of a courtyard garden, was a woman who was 102 years old, sitting very upright, her hands folded in her lap, watching. Meryl Streep saw the screen. She went still in a different way than she had gone still when she heard the piano. The first stillness was recognition arriving. This was recognition having arrived, and the person standing inside it, not knowing what to do with their hands. She walked to the edge of the stage. She looked at the screen. She said, "Eleanor." Eleanor Marsh, on the screen, in the chair by the window, said, "There you are." Her voice was thin and clear, the voice of someone very old whose mind has remained sharp and whose instrument has simply aged around it. She said, "I wondered how long it would take." Meryl Streep said, "I thought you were gone." Eleanor Marsh said, "Not yet." She said it without drama, the way she said everything as a simple fact, offered without decoration. "Not yet." Meryl Streep said, "You've been playing it all this time." Eleanor Marsh said, "Every time I thought about you," which was often. Meryl Streep pressed one hand flat against her sternum. She held it there. She said, "The thing you showed me in your living room in 1971. I have never lost it. Not once. I want you to know that." Eleanor Marsh said, "I know." She said it with the same certainty she had always used. The certainty of someone who has been paying close attention for a long time and trusts what the attention has told her. "I know. I watched." Jimmy Fallon was standing at the side of his desk with his hand over his mouth. His eyes were wet, and he was making no effort about it. No professional calibration. No management of what was visible. He was a man standing in a room watching something that had traveled 50 years to get there and had just completed the distance, and the only honest response to it was what was happening on his face. He turned to the audience. He could not speak. He shook his head once, slowly, and spread his hands, and the gesture said everything his voice could not. Questlove was not moving. A camera operator near the stage had stopped looking through the viewfinder and was watching with his own eyes. The director in the control room did not call for commercial for 13 minutes. 300 people rose without being asked, slowly, the way a room rises when it has been given something that demands a standing response, and everyone arrives at that understanding at the same moment. Meryl Streep and Eleanor Marsh talked for 11 minutes on the screen, while 300 people sat back down and went very quiet and listened to two women, one of them 102 years old, and one of them 74, say the things that needed to be said between a teacher and a student when 50 years have passed, and both of them are still here. At the end, Eleanor Marsh said, "Keep doing the work." Meryl Streep said, "I will." Eleanor Marsh said, "I know." Eleanor Marsh passed away in February 2024, 4 months after the taping, at the care facility in Woodbury, Connecticut. She was 102 years old. She died in the chair by the window with a view of the courtyard garden. The upright piano remained in the room with the good windows. The staff kept it there. On the evening of the day Eleanor Marsh died, one of the night nurses sat down at it and played the melody as best she could, having heard it enough evenings to carry the shape of it. Claire Marsh sent the recording of that evening to Meryl Streep. She received it in the morning and listened to it once and did not listen again. She did not need to. She had it. Meryl Streep has spoken about Eleanor Marsh in every interview she has given since October 2023. She mentions her by name. She says, "She was the first person who told me the truth about what I was doing." She says it simply, without elaboration, because Eleanor Marsh taught her that the things worth saying do not require decoration. The upright piano from Poughkeepsie, which Eleanor Marsh brought with her to the care facility in 1978, was donated to the drama department at Vassar College in the spring of 2024, at Meryl Streep's request. It sits in a rehearsal room. Students use it. On the wall above it, a small card reads, "Play it when you need to remember why." Some teachers find you once and stay with you your whole life, playing in the background, keeping the thing alive that you found in your second attempt. Because they made a promise, and they meant it, and the keeping of it cost them nothing except every evening for 50 years. That is what a teacher is. That is what it has always meant.